We're excited to have this conversation. This is the first public conversation we are having. We know each other both on the internet as activists, but it's good to be here. Before we start, I'll just say two things just to set the stage. One is this idea that part of the work of activism is about defining the terms. So when we use terms like diversity and inclusion, we're reminded that diversity is often about bodies, inclusion is about culture. You can hire 20 more black people and still have a racist company. You can recruit 20 more trans members of the community and still have a transphobic place. We think about other terms like accountability and justice, and people often use them interchangeably, but we're reminded that accountability is often what happens after the trauma. Justice is the idea that people shouldn't have to experience a trauma in the first place. The second thing I'll say is this notion about truth and reconciliation, and this is what I'm excited to talk about today, is that we're always reminded that the truth has to come before the reconciliation. There are a lot of people who want to do the reconciliation without doing the truth, but we want to force people to deal with the truth first. So I'll ask you to just start this conversation off as, can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to activism? You were a photographer before, that was what you did, that was your work, and then you became one of the leading activists in Kenya. How was that transition?
So I'm so happy to be here. Hi, everyone. So what happened actually, so about 11 years ago, I was a photographer for one of the biggest papers in the country. And then there was an election where normally like the big shots were fighting about who's going to become the next president. And when the election happened, there was a dispute between two people. And because the country has about 42 tribes, the supporters of the president and the opposition leader went to fight, and they were fighting for about 2 months. About 1,000 guys were killed, 500,000 displaced. There was a lot of violence and bloodshed. And covering that violence every single day, I saw another world. So I'll go cover the killings and cover people who have been displaced, women who had been raped, and then go back and find my pictures. Then the other side of town where the rich used to live, they would actually be frolicking together and everything was normal. And that disturbed me a lot. It's like, why can't I tell the truth? So for about a couple of months after the violence ended, I was so disturbed that I quit my job. I decided to actually go and heckle the president and tell him to tell the country the truth. I went to heckle him and I got arrested. I was beaten and jailed. And then while I was in prison, I thought about what was making me suffer and hurt so much was the violence that I saw. But the country never saw the violence firsthand. It was like the witness to the killings, the rape, and most of the things that actually happened. So I said, let me take my work to the streets and make people see what really happened and maybe find a way to make them join the movement. So that was the trigger. But before that, it was like every normal guy who was born poor and was like chasing the money. I wanted to become rich because I was running away from poverty. So when you get a job and you're making money, you're like, I want to just make money and mind my business. But the violence made me open another part of my brain that said, you can't be a silent bystander.
And you were recently arrested 2 weeks ago?
About 2 months ago.
2 months ago.
Yes.
Because they thought that you were leading a revolution. How long were you incarcerated?
So I was in jail for a couple of hours. I was picked from my house, and then I was taken to the police station. They said that I was part of a movement trying to overthrow the government. So when people get pushed a lot and have a lot of problems, they start organizing and start protesting. So they thought I was the leader, but I wasn't. I was just part of the movement.
And you have been worried about your safety before so much that you have moved your family to the States for a little bit just to make sure that they weren't hurt. Yeah. How recent was that, and what was that like?
So 2 years ago, I got into a fight between me and the deputy president. So before that, so let me take you back. So there's something called land grabbing, where you go to a public land that doesn't belong to you, and then you take it over. So the deputy president went to a school and took over the playground. So imagine Mike Pence going to a school, taking the playground, and building a hotel. So that's possible in this country as well. So the deputy president did that. I led a protest. We took back the land back to the school, and then so he had like grudge with me. So he goes on TV and then insults me. So I went on Twitter and said, you're a murderer and you're a thief, which is true. And so he said he's gonna kill me. So what did I do? I took my family. My family came to live in the US for about 10 months. I came here, I was here for a couple of weeks and realized that I was being useless. Like being here, sitting and tweeting was not enough. And I wrote about that I'm going to go back home. They want to kill me, but this is the guy who wants to kill me. So I went back home. And my family followed me. So my family was there for about 10 months.
How does your wife think about your activism?
So it's a tough one. She's been arrested as well. The challenge is not actually what she thinks, it's what people think about her. They think she's crazy to be with me. She suffered a lot. My kids understand what cops can do to you. There's a time when for protest, I got shot, and she thought I was going to die. So there's a lot of personal price that you pay. There's the trauma, and it's very emotional, actually. So when you protest and when you're in the streets, it's never about what you do there. So the protest is the event, but you live with your actions and what you do in the streets for a very long time. You suffer a lot. You get punished. I'm a photographer. I can't get a job as a photographer. I get punished for that. There's a lot of suffering from that. There's a price to pay. I think basically that's it. You sacrifice your life, your anonymity. You have to put your body in the line for others to get their freedom.
So how would you describe the political landscape and economic landscape of Kenya right now?
So Kenya is an interesting country. It's a beautiful, amazing country. We have the curse of bad leadership. It's the same country that gave you the best president ever. So Barack Obama's father is from Kenya. So give it up for Kenyans. We have the best coffee. So if you go to Starbucks, likely Kenyan coffee, best tea. But we suffer from bad political leadership. I think one of the things that actually suffered from the 90s actually and the 80s. So Bretton Woods came to Kenya to support a dictator who was in power, and they gave him conditions how to restructure the country. And because of that, kids left school because they had to fire teachers, fire doctors, fire nurses. So when you talk about the Africa AIDS epidemic, you can't talk about that without the World Bank and IMF, because the moment they let off teachers and doctors and nurses, people did not get access to social services. So you talk about 80s, 90s, brain drain, people leaving the country. And so in 2002, there was a change of regime and a change of mentality. So we had a new government, people started going to school. So today we have about 16 million kids going to school every single day. It's a very youthful population. We have about 8,300 dollar millionaires who control like 99.9% of the wealth of the nation. So they have so much money. So there's that as well. And the climate politically is one of the most corrupt countries in the continent. Our finance minister was arrested 2 days ago for stealing about $60 million. That's one guy, $60 million. So that's what we're going through. And then when you protest, you can get shot, you can get arrested if you're lucky. Yeah.
And if you're in jail for more than 6 months, you can't run for office? Is it?
So if they convict you for more than 6 months, you can't run for office. So I have a couple of court cases, but I think I'll walk.
And you did run for office.
So I ran for office 2 years ago. The election was marred with a lot of irregularities. I formed a young political party. It was based on integrity and good leadership and visionary leadership. So we decided to raise money from the public. I was able to raise money from the public to fund my campaign. I did not win, but I learned a lot of lessons from that run. And we also tried to change the politics in our continent. So from my running, so normally the guys in Africa, when they run, they bribe voters to vote for them. But when I was vying, I got voters to give me money to support my campaign. So it was changing the game, how it's played. Thank you. So I got a lot of support from people. If you talk about campaigns in our country, they talk about how the president ran, how the opposition leader ran, and then talk about our campaign. It's about clean politics. So the African politics is like a very dirty, polluted river. But you know very well that you can't empty a river. The only way to clean a polluted river is by adding clean water. And you add clean water, and you add clean water. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to just cleanse the politics by getting people who think they have a vision, they have integrity, they represent change to vie. Because the GDP of a country or the poverty of a country is a reflection of the leadership. So if your country is poor, if your people are suffering, it's a reflection of who is leading the country. So for that to change, we must change our leadership.
Now, this conference is heavily about economics. So what do you think the role of multinational organizations is or should be in African countries? There are a lot of people who who would make the argument that things like the World Bank, IMF, NGOs have done a lot of good. There are other people who would disagree.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think they've done more harm than good. So we talk about, so they prop up dictators. So if the Guinea-Bissau president doesn't have money to pay teachers or police officers, he comes to the IMF gives them money and they pay, which delays the people's urgency to change their leadership. They come and give money with conditionalities. So it's more about how do you repay our money? So you have to lay off staff, you have to do a lot of things to fit the donor demands. I think Africa needs more trade than aid. So for every dollar we get in Africa, we lose $2. There's a lot of looting in the continent. We're losing about $100 billion every year through illicit financial flows, the money leaving the continent. So we have the gold, we have the diamond, we have the cotton, we have the tea, we have the coffee, titanium, uranium, coltan for your cell phones. We have all these things. But the companies that actually mine these things don't pay taxes in Africa. So they take the money offshore and then they pay it somewhere else. So every time we get aid, we're losing more through money laundering and tax evasion. What we need actually is actually to ensure that the companies that actually do business in Africa, there's value addition. So if you're going to mine gold, you need to process your gold in the country. If you're gonna export coffee, export coffee that is actually already packaged and ready to be brewed. Germany is the fifth exporter of coffee in the world, but Germany has not a single coffee shop, and there lies the problem. So Switzerland is the #1 chocolate country, but they don't have cocoa or cocoa beans. So that's the problem, that we are being exploited, and the exploitation has actually happened over centuries. So you talk about the strongest men and women in our continent were taken away and became slaves in America, in Britain, in other countries. So they've been stealing our resources from human capital to raw goods for the longest time. I think we should disband IMF and World Bank. And if we don't disband them, we actually come up with an IMF that is more human-centered and people-centered more than we're giving you money, so do what you want. It's very paternalistic. It's like, I know what's the best for you. The World Bank spends about $2 billion paying overheads in Washington. If they represent the poor, they should close shop in Washington and move to a poor country and work from there. If you have never smelled poverty, experienced poverty, and felt poverty, you can't solve poverty. There's no way you can tell me that you're going to do drone assistance. So you come to Nairobi, that's the capital city of Kenya, you stay in a 5-star hotel, you visit a slum or two for a day or two, then you come back and do a report. It doesn't make any sense. So if you're going to spend your money in Africa or even Asia, go where your mouth is. Just go and work from there. So why do we have people who say they were working in developing countries, but your headquarters is in a rich country? Doesn't make any sense. So Oxfam had a similar problem. So Oxfam moved from the UK last year to Nairobi, Kenya, and say, if they're going to serve the people they think they want to serve in the continent, they're going to live among those people. You don't have to live in the same neighborhood. There's a neighborhood in Africa that looks like Washington. There are many of them. So you can actually do that, but you commute and work where the people are. And I think one more thing. So the challenge we have is actually that the IMF and World Bank prop up dictators. Because of the structural adjustment programs, it affected education, health, infrastructure. So you have an African dictator who doesn't build hospitals because if they get sick, they can go to London or wherever to go and get medication. If the kids want to go to school, they go to a private school, then they come to a UK or a US university. Because of the bad infrastructure, they buy a car that is worth $300,000 and they drive in those bad roads. We need to try and get the model right. Why can they get public solutions for public problems? Because what we have right now is actually private solutions for public problems. As long as you allow dictators to hide their money in these countries and to come and holiday in Paris and come here, they'll never do the right work back home. So how do we change that? We need to invest in young people. We need to invest in women. We need to invest in human capital. We need to invest in education. We need to find how do we change the regime. Because as long as we have bad leaders, we'll remain poor.
There we go. Are there any good examples of humanitarian aid or NGOs that you can think of? Or what's your advice to people for what like human-centered, you said if we don't get rid of the IMF, then we make a human-centered, people-centered IMF. And one example you gave is moving and being closer to the people that people say they serve. Are there any other things that you think would be a part of what it would actually mean to do this work well?
I think there are a couple of people in the audience today who do that. We need to listen more and ask people, what can we do with you? How can we work with you? So don't come with a solution, come and find a solution together. There's in Africa we have something called Ubuntu. I am because you are, we are because you are. So it's actually about community good. So find ways to work with people with their own ways, with their own culture, with their own norms. There's this mentality because you read a book or watched a movie, you have the solution. You don't. So don't assume. So come and go live in the community, work in the community. I think we need to, so-called philanthropies need to be able to work like missionaries. The only way Islam or Christianity was able to be spread in the continent and even in these countries because the missionaries lived among the community. So when you live in the community, you understand the language, you speak the language, you understand the culture, then you convert. So the same way, if you want to work with people, go live with them, understand them, then tell them, why don't you try my way? And together you can come up with a solution.
And what about reparations?
Reparations. It's been a hot day today. I think it's very important. So,
and can you define reparations first?
Pay. You got to pay. So it's very hard to give people checks for what happened to them, but you can decide to become a better human being. So I'll give an example where we are right now. So maybe this land belonged to a particular native tribe, but you can't get every single person to come and live here, and you can't give them a check. But maybe when they're displaced from this particular place, they're moved down the road, and there are no schools, there's no infrastructure, there's no clean water. So what you do, you make them pay a percentage of the money they get from profit to build a better community down the road, and then you reserve some jobs for the people from that community to come and work here. So you say 20% for the next 30, 40, 100 years will come from this community. So you empower them. There's enough wealth to go around. 26 billionaires in this world own 0.5% of the world's wealth. Those 26 billionaires only pay 4% of the tax. And there's something immoral and unethical about it. So how do we get the people who have much more to give back? How do we try and make greed a crime? Because you must limit how much one person can have. The people who have more money are the ones trying to turn you into consumers of things that you don't need. The people who have much more money, like Mark Zuckerberg, are the guys spying on your phone every single day to find a way to turn you into a perpetual buyer of things that you don't need. So we must limit how much one person should have. It's not socialism, it's just common sense. How much can you have? How much is enough? Because we have seen in history that human greed has no bound, and that is why the people who don't have as much should come together and say, if you have this much, this is your tax. So you make them feel good about paying taxes, but you must penalize them to pay more taxes. And as long as you allow the rich to fund your politics, your politicians will be there to serve the rich continuously. They will never be pro-poor. So you must think, how do you change the system? How do you change the mindset, what people see as richness? So every community in the world had set of values. But I think we came to a level where we became very individualistic, to a level where if you sit at the table right now with guys, everyone is on their phone, because now you're tethered, like you used to walk the dog, now the phone walks you. So it's just the phone. And that is actually a result of having a very greed, money-centered, consumer-centered humanity. That when things happen, actually, you don't see my humanity, you see me, there's something called othering. You other people, because they don't look like me, they're not same gender, we don't share sexuality. There's a lot of things of othering because of the way we have been programmed by the people who control the wealth. So we need to find a way to reclaim back our humanity. We need to find a way to say, enough is enough. There's enough money in the world to go around and have a surplus. Why is that money not going around? Why are there poor people in the world? Ask yourself. Doesn't make any sense that there are poor people in the world. There's enough money. Someone wakes up every day to look at their bank balance. They are sick in their head. But you can't admit that because maybe they fund this event, maybe because we like them, maybe because you consume what they produce. But ask yourself, why can't they just give without ceremonies? Why can't they just give and say, I'm going to give and give and give? Because if human beings were more introspective and understood the finality of life, that I'm going to die. If I live to 70, 80, I'm going to die. And when I die and they read my eulogy, they don't say I had so much money. It's about, did I have kids? Did I impact society? Did I make a difference? That's what they remember you about, not your bank balance. And you need to try and drive that to them, because I think the greed in the world right now is sickness. It's just sickness.
And we often say in organizing that hunger is a political issue. It's not a matter of resources. There is enough food so that everybody can eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The same thing about poverty. Now, you talked a lot about the political climate and the role of dictators and the need for people to elect new leaders. How do you make that happen in a place where money still determines so much of how politics sways? Like, what's the what there, even in your own country?
So I'll give an example of this country, actually. So change is never an event. You don't have an event, then you have change. And a good example is Barack Obama's presidency. So he has this movement of young people of all color, saying we want change, and he runs on hope, and then he gets elected. So he serves first term, gets elected again for the second term. When he's about to leave office, there's a Democratic primaries, and then Hillary wins the primaries, but people don't like her as much. But they say, she's going to win anyway, so I don't even have to vote. And then you don't vote, then you get Trump. And the point is, change is not an event. It's a continuous thing. The gains you gain, when you fight and you gain something or you win ground, you must defend those gains. Because if you don't defend them, you're going to go back. Like, impunity fights back. The rich will fight back. Capitalism fights back. Everyone fights back. And my point is, how do you change a country? You change a country one person at a time, one word at a time. And when you change that one person, you defend the ground that you gain. It's the same military tactic they use. When they go and they clear this house, they don't leave the house empty. They leave someone to ensure that no one comes in and plants something bad. The same thing about change. That when you fight for change, when you find something that you like, you stand there and you defend that before you advance. So how do you change our continent? By ensuring that the people who fund schools and fund hospitals should fund civil society, young people who are fighting for change, Black Lives Matter, protest with them, tweet about it, Facebook about it, do something about it. It's by being an active citizen. I know most of you say, I'm a lawyer, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a doctor, I'm a venture capitalist, I'm an angel investor, all those things that you say about you. But beyond the money that you make every day, are you trying to make a difference in your community, in your society? You don't have to go beyond the borders of your state. There's problems in this country. Work locally. change locally. And then once your problems are solved locally, the guys who are changing locally are going to go abroad and change abroad. But you can't say you're going to come and save the continent or save Africa or save Kenya and your country's in shit.
Yes, say it.
Now, what do you make in Kenya of the foreign investment from like Chinese companies, for instance, that is more than it has been in the past? I know we talked about the IMF and the World Bank, but what about foreign companies from places like China?
So China is actually on its deathbed. So the country is about 1.2, 1.3 billion people. They have nowhere else to go. And so they have to look for new land to conquer. And because now they can't come with guns and planes and boats and come and take over a country, they use money to do that. They need markets for their goods, and then they need food for the people. So they come to a country like Kenya, it's called One Belt, One Road initiative, and they give you money without any conditions. And then they give you very bad contracts. So like in Kenya right now, we've been fighting with the president to tell us when they built us a railway that is useless, it's called the railway to nowhere. It's like the rail to nowhere. When they gave us the rail to nowhere, what was the conditions? And what we've been told, like the surety for that was our port. Because the Chinese will say, we're going to give you the money, but the surety must be something else. You must give us something in return. If we fail to pay for the rail, they'll take our port for like 30, 40 years and control that entire market.
Wow.
So the Chinese money is like dirty money because they don't care about good governance. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about democracy. All they want is, we're going to give you the money. You're going to give us access to your market and maybe your farms as well, because we need to produce food for our people. So, and the Chinese are able to do that and get away with it because there's, across the world, there's a change of regimes. So yesterday was Boris Johnson became the UK premier. You have Trump here. The people who used to be the vanguards of democracy are no longer there to do that. So there's a lot of bad examples. So in every big country can misbehave and do whatever they want because the world police is no longer the world police, it's the world bully.
And I know we talked about reparations. I wanted to know what you thought about land redistribution.
So if you look at the continent of Africa and even the Native Americans here, land never belonged to a single person. Land belonged to the community. And whatever produce came from the land was shared in the community. But when we got colonized, the people who colonized became lords. So we had Lord Delamere, Lord Egerton, and they said, this is my land, and I'm the lord over this land. And then they gave value to the land and took the land to themselves. So countries like Kenya, South Africa, Namibia, we need to have the land. We need to have the land discussion, that the land must come back to the community, and the community can actually farm it for good. Because what they normally do is actually come and say, we're doing conservation, we're going to fence this entire 45,000 acres of land and do conservation. But you have to realize, actually, in the history of our continent, we never used to kill wildlife. It's very rare to walk to an African house and find elephant tusks or leopard skins. We don't need them. We like animals where they are, not in our houses. But now, because people have given value to these things, so there's trophy hunting and other things. So the land must go back to the people. It's actually very important. But we also need to devalue land. I think where you're going, you need more human capital. But the land should be for farming and for people to get produce and to use the land that it's supposed to do. Problem is, there's a lot of hoarding of land. A good case in point, South Africa, 95% of black people don't have land, but 5% of the white minority control the land. And we need to actually ask, why can't they get the land back? And I'm going to throw in a very controversial statement here. And this is not, let me leave it.
You can't like tease it now.
Okay, so let me give you an example. So the world, and I don't support what's happening in Palestine and Israel, but the world has given Israel the right of return to land that is already occupied by other people. And they've been trying to push out the Palestinians, which is very wrong and I don't support. I'm pro-Palestine. And so if Israelis have the right of return, I think Africans and Native Americans and every other native community have a right of return to their land. Because unlike Israelites already occupied, the Palestinians actually occupied part of the land and they've been kicked out. For Africa, if you're a Dutch colonialist, you can go back to the Netherlands. If you're in Namibia, where the Germans, the first genocide actually was the Herero people who were killed by the Germans in Namibia. And if you go to Namibia today, the Herero survivors, the descendants of the survivors, are landless, but the Germans still occupy their land. But if you kick out those Germans and say, let's share the land, they can come back to Germany. If you go to South Africa, the Dutch can come back to the Netherlands. If you come to Zimbabwe, when Mugabe took the land, the British came to Britain and some went to Australia. If you come to Kenya, they have a place to go back to. But I have no place to come. I can't, no African is going to come and say, I'm coming to the US, that's where my land was. No, there's no land for me here. So my point is, we either share the land or we have a discussion how we can get the land back. Because the same way the Israelites have the right of return, which is very controversial, is the same way the Africans and native communities have the right to return to their land. Because when the land was taken, no money was paid. There was nothing. Guys came off the boat with nothing, not a single cent, nothing. And they took thousands and thousands of acres. So we need to have that discussion. It's very uncomfortable. I know it makes people say, no, it can't. We should have that conversation. The same way we should have the conversation about African Americans built this country. The G7, the most powerful nations in the world, were built on the back of slaves. Without slavery, there is no economic development. Without slavery, there is nothing. So why can't those people, the descendants of those slaves, get a share of the pie? Why do they get shafted? Why? Why do they live in poor communities, poor neighborhoods, and you know very well that you got this wealth for free? Yeah. They were never paid. They were beaten, they were raped, they were hanged, they were mutilated, they were lynched. So many things happened to them. I think it's only human to say we need to do it right by them. We shouldn't have people like Flint who don't have clean water. We shouldn't have people in, what's the name of Puerto Rico, where they had a hurricane?
San Juan, in Puerto Rico? All of Puerto Rico. It was Puerto Rico, the flood, the hurricane?
Yeah, the hurricane, yeah. Shouldn't have people dying of things that are actually preventable. I think, and you need to go back. Why can't we make love a currency? Like, when you want to do something and you want to make a difference and ask yourself, is this love? Let's try and make love universal. Because the problem we face a lot is actually that when you want to love someone, we have these many lenses that we are wearing. There's skin color, there's class, there's gender, there's sexuality. Why can't we just make love a currency? Which means that anyone who is about to make a difference, they say that this harm or do good. And we make doing good something that actually happen instantly. If you look at kids have no biases. They have no tribe, they have no skin color, they have nothing. Kids, I like you, I don't like you, they're just there, they're just innocent. But as you grow up, society conforms us and say, no, you must behave in a particular manner. You must talk like this. Those are not your people. You're different. We need to break those barriers because the truth is, this world will implode. And when it does, we shall all suffer. We pretend that climate change doesn't affect me because I'm not in Africa. And it's true. If you go to Africa, the seasons come late. There's drought sometimes. And when the rain comes, when you have planted, it's flooding, so you lose your crops. And Africa pollutes less. But the powerful countries pollute more. But the truth is, when the chicken comes home to roost, we shall all suffer because the earth is connected. So there's this illusion that, no, you want to be hit. But the heat wave never used to happen, right? So how long are we going to continue to deny that we are all interconnected, that we live in one world, that Africa, Asia, Latin America, America, Japan, we are all interconnected. If we don't have that discussion, we're going to die together like fools.
And to this question of What happens if we don't do the work that we're supposed to do? Do you think that revolution will be inevitable in a lot of places across the world?
So look at Japan. So last year, more people died in Japan than they were born. China is done, India is done, the US, in another 20 years, you're going to have more colored people, more people of color than white people. Africa, at the moment, you're 1.2 billion people. By 2100, you're going to be 4 billion Africans. So the takeover will happen eventually.
The takeover, is that what we're calling it?
You're gonna, yeah. No, you see, you can only fight change for so long. So you can deport as many people as you want every single day, but the flavor and the color and the control of this country is changing every single day. So people are in denial, but that's the way it is. So it's going to happen eventually. And guess what? There's this NSC protest, and I see a quote, on the poor have nothing to eat, they'll eat the rich. That will happen. That will happen eventually. Because, the other thing about, look at the young people in this country and many other countries. Most young people actually don't care about skin color, they don't care about nationality, they just want to live and be happy and have a good time. But because of our parents' mentality and how we think, we are poisoning the young generation. But one day they'll actually wake up and say, I'm different. If you look at apartheid in South Africa, the people who made it become a trend and for South Africa to get independence was not South Africans. It was people living outside South Africa. People in the university, people who protested in that and said, this must end and we must all live together like brothers and sisters. So eventually, the young people of this country, what was the name of the shooting, the school shooting? The young Parkland shooting. Those young kids saying, you must end gun violence, you must bring gun controls. That's actually the future. Young people telling their parents, we're taking over and you're going to do it our way because you failed. I also think because of the comforts of life. So 50 years ago, 70 years ago, comforts were very rare. TVs were very rare. There was a radio, but people had to work. People were more willing to be more proactive and make a difference. So fast forward to 2019, we have so many comforts that you don't want to be inconvenienced. So you decide to like or tweet instead of going to the streets. And that is the problem, that because of the comforts of life, you have become more complacent and more passive about issues. And then you become more disconnected. I think also Hollywood has a role to play in that. You see so much violence in movies that when you see true violence, it doesn't shock you anymore because Hollywood has been shocking you for the longest time to a level where you become numb to human suffering. So we need to disconnect and just try and get back our humanity. I think the struggle we're having right now as humans is like, how do we get back that love, that compassion, that empathy? How do we become human all over again? Because we are not human anymore. We're just, as Sherry said, we are commodities in the market. We've been commodified, and we need to stop being commodified.
And as we come to a close, do you worry about your own safety? And I know we talked about this. I ask because I worry about my own. The first person ever permanently banned from Twitter was banned for raising money to try and get me killed. I've been arrested, and a movie theater got evacuated because somebody said they're going to kill me. All those things. So I think about this intimately. I'm interested in your answer. But how do you continue to do the work while you think about your own safety?
So I don't worry about my safety anymore. I used to worry about it many times, and I used to worry that they're going to kill me, I'll leave my family. And we had this talk with my wife and my kids, that we shall all die eventually. So life is a journey. It's like getting on a train and tomorrow I'm going to New York. And if you get on a train going to New York, you might not get to a destination, you may get off in Boston or somewhere else along the way, but the train continues. So if you worry about your death, you become ineffective because you die so many times in your mind because you live in fear. And so if you think about change and you think about life in terms of that you're going to die, we shall all die. The good guys, the bad guys, the rich, the poor shall all die. The question is, what are you going to do between now and your death? So So you wake up every day and say, today I'm going to make a difference, today I'm going to live my life. I normally say that you can never achieve anything without courage. And so you must have courage, the courage to live your life, the courage to love yourself, the courage to do right, the courage to care, the courage to believe that you're not insignificant, the courage to believe that you can make a difference no matter where you are in this part of the world. So you just say, today, I'm going to be the best person I can be in my life. And if death comes, you're fine, you're ready to go. It's true, maybe the next life is going to be better. So let's not worry about death, people. Let's not worry. You know, fear makes you to become paralyzed. Fear makes you not to become bold. Fear is the reason why we don't do right. Because you fear being judged, you fear being called names, you fear all these things, man. But when you're dead, who cares? You're dead. You're gone. It's true, man, you're gone. So don't live in the fear of dying. Don't. Because like you're dying every single day. Like every day, I'm gonna die, You're gonna die. You will die. So live your life.
Now, last two questions. What do you say to people who have done all the things they were told to do? They emailed, they protested, they called, they like went to the sit-in, they went to the die-in, they did all the things, and the world hasn't quite changed the way they wanted it to change. What do you say to those people?
Don't lose hope. Yes. Don't lose hope, because you're in a marathon, and a marathon is not like a sprint. And at the end of the marathon is when you die. And what actually happens at the end of the marathon when you die, you pass on the baton to the next runner, and the next runner, and the next runner. So don't give up. You can't afford to give up, man. Because you're giving up and there's so much hurt and so much hate and so much grief in the world. If you give up, what happens to those people who have no voice? Because you're blessed to have a voice, you're blessed to be in a country where you can be able to do protest and have your voice heard. Just keep doing that. You have to appreciate that you're fortunate to be born where you're born, and that you're not going to be killed for saying what you believe, to be killed for your gender or for your sexuality, and that's a blessing. So what you do with that blessing is your gift back to the world. So yes, you have protested. Yes, you've been arrested. You've been threatened. You have felt like giving up. But when you give up, what happens to you? You die inside. So you'll be a walking shell. You're running away from your destiny. Don't do that.
And last question is, what's a piece of advice that you've gotten over the years that stuck with you?
Sorry?
A piece of advice that you've gotten that like you'll never forget that stuck with you.
So when I was about 17 years old, my mother died. And when my mother died, I almost gave up with life. I was living in a very small house, like a shanty. I was afraid because I grew up with my mom and had no other person to run to. And when she died, I thought it was the end of the world. Then a friend of mine, or rather a friend of my mother, called me and said, let's have a meeting. So I went to see him. We sat in a restaurant, and I was crying, I was crushed. I thought my life was coming to an end. And he told me, Boniface, I know your mother is dead, and I know you're hurting, but I want to tell you something. He told me life is like a supermarket. You can walk to a supermarket any day, and when you walk in, you can pick anything you want. I want that fridge, I want that big TV, I want cornflakes, I want that, I want that. And if you don't even have any, if you don't have enough people to push the trolleys for you, you can get the manager for the supermarket to come and help you push those things for you. But when you get at the till, you must pay the price for those things for you to get out. And he told me that, yes, your mother is dead, but that's not the end of your life, because life is a supermarket. You can get anything you want in life. You can achieve anything you want in life as long as you're willing to pay the price. So I'm always willing to pay the price to get what I want. So be willing to pay the price, and you get what you want.
Boniface, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for being you. Yes.
Thank you, man. Thanks.